friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's You Autumn Know and Thanks a Latte. So I've stamped my images in Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to start with the mug on the left, and I wanted it to be a nice turquoise blue. So I chose BG11, BG53, and BG57. I'm starting with the BG57 and laying in some darkness on either side using a flicking motion. And then I'll go in with the next shade, the BG53, and catch the edge of that so it softens it into the next shade, and then use the BG11 as the highlight in the center. I am going to do a second layer of all of that since this is a big image and I want it to be nice and smooth. So I'm going to do that second layer to get everything really well blended. For some reason I had a little bit of brown on the tip of that BG53, so I scribbled that off on a piece of paper off to the side, and I'm just going to keep blending over that until it's not nearly as noticeable. So then I'll just go back in with that BG11 for that center highlight once again, and then I'll continue on with the rest of that mug. So I'm going to do the handle starting with that BG57 again, and also the rim on the far side of the mug, and blend that out with the BG53, and then use the BG11 for the highlight. And I did do a second layer on that area as well. I just did that off screen so everything matches nicely. The second mug I'm going to do in orange, and I wanted it to be kind of like a rusty orange. So I chose YR12, YR14, and YR18. So again, I'm going to come in with that darkest shade, the YR18, and lay in that shadow with that. And then I'll blend out with the YR14 and use the YR12 as my highlight. So the center part that has the little coffee or cappuccino stamped inside, I stamped that with Lawn Fawn dough ink, and I didn't get that lined up perfectly. You can see that there's a white border between that brown and the front rim of that mug. So I'm going to fix that with Copics in just a little bit. So that's just a tip for you. If you don't get it stamped perfectly, not to worry, you can absolutely fix that. I wanted to add a little bit of dimension in there anyway with some Copics, so it'll be really easy to cover up. I am going to do a second layer on this mug as well. It really beefs up that saturation, plus it just makes the blend really nice and smooth, and I wanted some bold, punchy colors for this card. So the color palette was actually inspired by a ribbon I had stopped over at my grandmother's house a couple days earlier, and she asked me to make a bow for a wreath that she had on her door. I used to work in a craft store, and I made loads, bows by the hundreds for them. So it was really quick and easy for me to do, but the print on the fabric had these kind of rusty orange and turquoise pumpkins on it. So I totally pulled the color inspiration from that bow. So now I'm fixing that little oops there with the coffee not coming to the edge with E55 and E57. And then I'm going to go over the edge of the E55 with the colorless blender just to help it fade into the rest of that stamping. And then I'm going to use these shades for the mouse as well. I'm just going to add in the E53. So I'll start with that E57 so I can have a nice little dark brown mouse. Give him some shadow on the outside edges, and then I'm going to start to blend that out with the E55. I want to keep his face nice and light, so you can see that I'm keeping those darker shades toward the outer edge. I want to make sure that I have plenty of room for that lightest shade. So I'm just making sure to blend out that E57 really nicely, And then I can come in with the E53 and fill in the rest of his face and his body. Aside from his tummy and his little feet, I'm going to do those different. So I'm going to finish up with that E53, and then I'm going to add in a little color in his belly and ears and on his feet, and then blend that out with the E51. So he'll have just a little bit of a lighter patch there on his tummy and feet. And I did go back and do a second layer with that as well, just to kind of beef up that color and make it a little bit stronger. Then for the marshmallows, I'm going to use E50 and E51. I just want them to have that little bit of like a vanilla shade that marshmallows typically have. So keeping that color really close to the edge again, because I want them to be predominantly white, but just have that little bit of shading on them. I'm also going to do the marshmallow swirl that is separate, or maybe it's like a macaroon, like not a French macaron, but a macaroon, is that right? I've actually never eaten one, but I think that's what they're called. But anyway, I'm going to do the ones in the coffee cup as well. Almost forgot to do those ones, but I definitely want them to match the single ones. So just using those same two shades for that. I wanted the coffee that is in the turquoise cup to be a cafe mocha, because that is what I drink every single day. It is my favorite drink in the whole wide world. So I wanted it to have more of like that chocolate look, and I find that the E40s really do well for chocolate because they have a little bit of like a dustier tone to them. So I chose E44, E47, and E49. Started with the E49, did a little outline on the outer edge, and then also underneath the little marshmallows, and then blended out with the E47. And now I'm filling in any white space there with that E44, just making sure that I break up the edge of that E47 and E49 because those are super dark. And then I'm going to move on and add some color to my mouse's nose with R20, and then I'll fill in the ears and give him some rosy cheeks with R20 and R11, just coloring right over the shades I already put in his ears to help them look a little bit more natural. And then I'm going to move on to my leaves, and I wanted these to be like multicolored, but just like a little bit of a softer version of the orange and turquoise shades. So the first combo that I picked was YR01, YR02, and YR04. And I'm going to add a bit of that to each of the leaves. It's kind of just picking and choosing spaces and kind of like trying to figure out where they were going to land on the card so that I wouldn't have like the oranges right up next to each other and stuff like that. I want to spread that color around. So I used the YR4 for the darkest and then blended out with the YR2. And then I'm using the YR01 for like the transition shade. It's the highlight, but it's also going to be colored over with the other shades. So I want to make sure that I'm using a light shade there that other colors can layer over and it will still blend nicely. So my next combo is BG10, BG11, just those two, and I'm flicking in a bit of that BG11, and there you can kind of see I'm letting that BG10 overlap a little bit of that YR01 so that it gets nice and soft. I don't want to go too heavy over it because blue and orange are going to make brown together, but it's not such a big deal if it does kind of turn a little bit brownish because the third combo that I'm going to be using is brown on these leaves. So that was kind of purposeful. I wanted to, add something in there so it wouldn't look like muddy by accident. It would look intentional. So I added a bit of that aqua shade to each of those leaves and made sure to redefine any edges since I was only using the two colors. And then the final combo is E30, E31, and E33. So always putting that darkest shade on the outer edge and then blending toward the inside where those colors will overlap and meld together. And I think that worked out really well. They really turned out better than I even hoped they would. So using that E33 to also outline some of the little artist drawn lines that are there just to add some more definition to those leaves, and then blending over the transition areas very carefully, but also just making sure everything is nice and smooth and just not overly muddied, like I said. Gentle. So I'm going to trim these out with the matching dies and move on to my background. I'm going to take a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock and use the fall leaves background stencils with some Distress Oxide inks. So you can tape these in place, but I generally just hold on to them firmly, so I don't normally have a problem doing that. The first color that I'm going to go in with is Salvage Patina, and I am kind of mimicking the shades that I'm choosing in this background with the shades that I combined on those 3 large leaves. So I just added that kind of here and there, and then I'm going to take the carved pumpkin for the orange and just blend that on here and there as well. Just some of it is going to go over the edge of the Salvage Patina, and some of it will just be on its own. And then to mimic the light brown shade, I chose Gathered Twigs. So I'll add a bit of that here and there as well, and just make sure that everything is filled in. I don't want any empty spots that don't have any ink on them, because then the stencil won't transfer onto the background and there will be like missing spaces. So just making sure that I've got everything filled in that I want filled in. And then once I'm finished with that one, I'm going to swap that out for the other stencil. And I'm just going to turn that until I have that lined up correctly. It's going to fit just like a puzzle. And the easiest way that I found to line that up was to look for the leaves that have those 3 little lines in them, or also the little berries that have stems added to them with this second stencil. So I'm looking for those stems first and adding that Gathered Twigs to them as well. I wanted those to all be brown, and then just adding a bit more brown here and there. And then I'll go back to my carved pumpkin and add a bit of that. And then finally I will go in with my Salvage Patina and fill in the rest of those little bits there. So I have even coverage with those 3 shades. I did have to go back to my ink pad and add a bit more of that color because it was not looking very blue anymore because there wasn't much ink left on that ink blending tool. So once I have everything filled in, I'll lift that up, and there you can see that beautiful background. Ugh, I love it so much. Such a beautiful color palette. I'm going to take some of the Gansai Tambi Starry colors. I'm choosing the one that has this coppery shade to it. I added a bit of water, and I'm doing some splatter detail in the background. You could also use some of the stencil paste, but today I didn't have time to let them dry. I was in a bit of a hurry to get my son to work, so I decided to do this instead since it dries pretty quickly. So there you can see I have cut down that panel with one of the large stitch rectangle stackables, and then I cut down a piece of mermaid cardstock with the outside in stitch rectangle stackables, and I used a stitched circle stackable to cut down a piece of vellum. My card base is a piece of speckled eggshell cardstock from Lawn Fawn. It has little flecks in it that I think look really rustic and perfect for fall. So I'm going to layer that mermaid cardstock down first, and then I will take that leafy background and I'm going to glue that down right over top. So it'll just give me like a little bit of an extra pop of color around the edges. And then so that my images stand out a little bit better on that background, I'm going to glue down a piece of vellum to just mute that background right behind them. and I glued that down with some Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. You couldn't see where I adhered it at all, but it did dry a little bit wrinkly. I was just testing it out, but I made sure to add that glue where the images would cover it up. So now I'm going to stamp out my sentiment. I'm just doing this on an extra piece of that speckled eggshell cardstock, and I'm using that dough ink. That's the same ink that I used to stamp the inside of the little latte or cappuccino. And I'm stamping So Very Grateful. And that is from the Scripty Autumn Sentiments. Then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI so that I can stamp on the inside. And I'm going to do the word thanks and another little leaf. Those are from the Scripty Autumn Sentiments as well. And then once I have that removed, I'm going to add one of the little mice from You Autumn Know sitting on top of that word thanks. So now I'm ready to assemble my scene. I've added some foam tape to the backs of most of my images. I'm going to start with the two large mugs. Those two do not have foam tape on the back of them. So I'm adding glue to the backs of both of them so I can get them lined up and centered where I want them together. And I added them a little bit high of center so that I have room down in front to add the rest of my images. I'm going to add the big leaf there in the center. And then I have the little mouse. He's going to be sitting on that leaf between the two mugs. So I added a bit of foam tape behind his head and then liquid glue where he sits on the leaf. The other two blended leaves I'm going to add on either side, and those are popped up with foam tape as well. Then I'm going to take the little meringues and tuck those in between the leaves and the coffee mugs to kind of fill in that space. I wanted this little scene to look nice and full. I've added some foam tape to the back of the 3 separate marshmallows. So I'm going to just add 1 over on the left and 2 on the right overlapping just to kind of break up the symmetry a tiny bit. I really like symmetry, but sometimes I got to just throw it off a tiny bit. So I die cut the word grateful with the matching dies and then trimmed out the rest of the sentiment with an everyday sentiment banner. I added some foam tape to the back of the banner piece, and I'm going to add that right under my scene. And then I'm using some liquid glue to adhere that die cut, and I'm using that Barely Art glue again because it has such a super fine nozzle, so it works really great for these thin die cuts like this. So once I have that, I'm going to just add that right underneath that banner. And then I felt like the top of the card was out of balance with the bottom of the card. There was too much empty space. So I took the little swirls. There's a steam one from Thanks a Latte, and then the other 2 are supposed to be for the leaves, like Wind from You Autumn Know. And I'm going to add those behind the mug. So I put the tallest one in the center, and then I have this double one over on the right hand side, and then another small little curly Q over on the left. And I feel like that added so much more balance. It's got the same amount of space at the top and bottom of the card. I'm going to finish off the card with a bit of stickles. I used the Stardust stickles on all of the marshmallows. Because it's clear, it just adds a little bit of like a sugary effect to them. I did it on the macaroons as well. And then I decided to add some platinum stickles to the leaves just to kind of mimic that coppery splatter in the background. I didn't want to cover up too much of the coloring I did, so I mainly just put it on the outside edge in a couple little places here and there, so it would just have the barest little bit of sparkle. So I'm going to add it to the 3rd leaf, and then I will pick that up to the camera so you can see how that looks. And I'll give you another peek at the inside as well. I think this is a great thank you card for pretty much any occasion for fall. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had so much fun creating this one for you. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. All of the products I used will be listed and linked down below if you're interested. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.